Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from 2 Plus Tough, and in this video we're going to take another look at the Fyreslayers Start Collecting Box. When I did the first set of reviews for these kind of start collecting products, the channel was much younger, I didn't know what I was doing, and quite frankly the game has changed. They have new battle tomes and a new edition and all these crazy things, and so in this video we're going to take a good look at the Fyreslayers Start Collecting Box, taking a look at literally what models you get, how they look for a hobbyist from like a bird's eye view as far as what you get to paint. We'll go through war scroll by war scroll, each and every one of the models here. I'll kind of give you my thoughts on which to build. That'll come important later. And then wrap it up with a discussion about the overall value of the box based on how often you'll actually use these models. So without further ado, let's hop into the Fyreslayers Start Collecting Box. Okay, so in the Fyreslayers Start Collecting Box, essentially you're getting two kits, but one of those kits has a myriad of ways that it can be built. And that is, of course, the Magmadroth. Okay, so the Magmadroth can have up to 3 different riders on it. There's the Rune Father, Rune Son, and Rune Smiter. For the purposes of this review, I'm going to focus on what I think, honestly, if you're just starting, is the best choice, which is the Rune Father. He is my absolute favorite model, and you get 2 foot heroes as well. So there's no wasted parts in it. You still get the lower torsos needed to have the Rune Smiter on foot, which he's a fantastic guy, and the Rune Son on foot. In addition, the second kit that you get is a unit of 10 Valkite Berserkers. Now, looking at this from kind of a bird's eye view, it's one of those boxes that I kind of struggle with because it makes getting into the faction very hard. When you have all your heroes locked into a single kit, it becomes both a great way to get a bunch of heroes, right? You pick up one of these, you've got hero options. You can pick up 3 of these boxes and never have the same hero option on the table. And that's really cool. It is actually a very awesome thing. But the other part is simply that most other start collecting boxes have a variety of models, whereas these are really focused on, again, the 2 kits. One is your basic infantry, one is all of your heroes. And so if you're playing in something like a Path to Glory League, where you're slow growing your army and that kind of stuff, you will struggle in the beginning because your lists are going to be so hero-centric. However, once you flesh out the rest of the army, you'll see that those heroes add a lot of value to your faction. In fact, heroes are kind of the jam of the Fyreslayers because they make these big bricks of infantry incredibly resilient, and so they are kind of a focal point. The reason I point all this out is because this set of models is awesome, but you will struggle in sort of like a slow grow campaign thing in the first couple of rounds. Once you expand past this box, the faction will flesh out a lot more, and I think you'll enjoy it. Now what I always do next is I go over to the shared screen. We're going to take a look at the war scrolls individually, talk about what you can reasonably expect from all the models in the box, and I'll kind of give my justification for why I think the Rune Father is the best choice, at least to start with. You know, you have all the options eventually, but as a starter, it's really not a bad start. So let's go hop over to the war scrolls. Now, when I'm doing these War Scroll reviews, I always like to start with the leader, because it kind of sets the tone of what everything else is going to be. And so the reason I say go with the Rune Father, one, if you're getting into this faction, you should know, like lore-wise, if that's what interests you, the Rune Father is like the big dog of the entire faction that you're going to be playing. So thematically, very cool, impressive model, and a fantastic attack profile. Makes it very easy to pick him up. So again, the other ones have some side rules and that kind of stuff. He's very straightforward, and so I just think he's a great starter. Now, we're going to look here at their stat line, and I always do this for newer folks. If you ever see this little star right there, that means it's a variable. There's a table down below, and basically you just look to see how many wounds has my guy suffered, go over, and then it'll give you your move characteristic. So that number goes up here. So he has 14 wounds total. He starts at a movement of 12, which is a fantastically fast speed for this faction. It's dwarves. They're super slow. 4-up save. He's nice and tough with an 8 bravery. Now, as far as missile weapons go, he has 2. Every unit in this faction that I can think of off the top of my head, maybe with the exception of one, has a throwing axe. Okay, they can all chuck axes, and they all have the exact same profile, so I'm going to say it now, and we're going to speed past it later. This is the Firesteel Throwing Axe, has an 8-inch range, so not very far, 1 attack, 5s to hit, 5s to wound, no rend, 1 damage. Now, keep in mind though, Even though that doesn't sound like much, if every unit has one, and you're getting those shots when you get into combat, which is where you want to be. You want to be in melee. In the shooting phase, you can still shoot at whatever unit you're engaged with. So even though the attacks are not great, it will add up to a couple wounds over the course of a game. And I think that's kind of the intention, right? It's not about being a kill machine, but it's just about adding a little bit more damage here and there. But in addition to that, the Magmadroth itself has the Roaring Fire Stream, 12-inch range, and it says see below. So let's scroll down here. Roaring Fire Stream is the first of the abilities. Do not use the attack sequence for an attack made with a Roaring Fire Stream. Instead, make the dice roll shown on the damage table above. Again, so though we're connecting his shooting attack, the Magmadroth, with how many wounds he's taken, makes perfect sense. If the roll is equal to or less than the number of models in the target unit, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. If the roll is equal to or less than the number of models in the target unit and the target unit's within 6 inches, so they're really close, the target unit suffers D6 mortal wounds instead. So let's take a look at this. So what this is basically saying is you're not going to roll your normal to hit to wound, nothing like that. If they're within 12 inches, you pick the unit, and then you're going to roll, let's say he has 0 wounds suffered, okay? You're going to roll a single D6. If that D6 is equal to or less than the number of models in the unit that you're shooting, you're going to do D3 mortal wounds, and D6 if they're within 6 inches, if they get closer. And then as he takes damage, you're rolling more dice, which makes it harder and harder to roll lower than the number of models in the defending unit. So to put this into context, if you go into, say, a pack of clan rats, right, 20 clan rats, you cannot roll above, how many are there on a single D6. If you try to use this weapon against like a hero, well, there's only one model in that unit. So on a D6, you're just really hoping for a 1. And so it's kind of explaining that for you. It's honestly, the Magmadroth is the most cumbersome war scroll in this army, with a lot of things to remember. And so once we get past him, everything else will go really fast and smooth, but it can be rough, okay? So you're allowed to keep track of how many models are in the unit that you're shooting at and how far away are they. That's the basic gist. Moving into melee weapons, claws and horns, 1-inch range. Attacks as a dash. He starts at 6, goes down to 2. But these are doozies. They hit on 4s, wound on 3s, -1 rend, and 2 damage. I love flat 2 damage. It just punks things. Blazing Maw, it's his mouth. So we have 1-inch range, 1 attack, 4s to hit, 2s to wound, -2 rend, and D3 damage. And we have the Latchkey Grand X, which is the big daddy weapon that the Rune Father is wielding. 3-inch range, which is phenomenal for, he can actually, like, if a unit of chaff comes up against the Magmadroth and there's a leader behind that kind of wall of guys, the 3-inch range allows him to reach over the first wave of chaff that's in your way and target the hero as long as he's in 3 inches. So that's kind of a thing to remember. And that axe has 3 attacks, hits on a 3, wounds on a 3, -1 rend, and the damage is straight 3, and it does not go down. So that is the bomb weapon, and I absolutely love him. There are ways between artifacts and buffs and that kind of stuff to make his attacks work a little better. And so when he piles into something, it evaporates. I'm not going to say that he's a broken unit and he's so good, he's going to crush everything. No, he's a very good unit. He'll need protection. He can't just run up and take the whole board by himself. But if your opponent ignores him and lets him, fall into a unit, whether it's a large unit of like Skaven clan rats, like we said before, or a hero, he's going to mess something up, right? So he can't be ignored, and that's really awesome. Now, we already moved through the damage table here, and we're going to start taking a look at this mountain of special rules. So we kind of come into like my first, it's not a complaint, but it's a warning. I think warning is definitely an apt word when it comes to the Fyreslayers. Like I said before, the Magmadroth really is the most complicated war scroll in the army. There's a lot of things that happen at very particular times. So I'm just going to say this very quickly. I really do recommend for this faction, above pretty much any other, you go to a website that I'll put in the link down below. It's called AOS Reminders. It's a free tool, and basically you just put in what units you're using, and it organizes all of the sequence and timings for you. So you have a little cheat sheet to remind you of when to do things. I think that's really important because you're going to see what I'm talking about. So I'm just putting that disclaimer out there. Once we get past this War Scroll, it's really simple, and all of the Magmadroth abilities we'll talk about are the same no matter who the rider is. And so once you learn it once, you're good forever. So that's kind of a nice little, we'll say, consolation prize. So looking here, we already went through the Roaring Fire Stream. Now we have the Lashing Tail. At the end of the combat phase, again, very specific time, roll a dice. For each enemy unit within 3 inches of this model, if the roll is less than the number of models in that unit, it suffers D3 mortal wounds. So it's the same thing as, you're rolling to see if you can roll lower than the number of models in the unit. But instead of being a shooting attack, it's every unit within 3 inches. So if you pile drive him into 2 or 3 units and he survives, you're getting a tail lash on all of them. At least it's shot at a tail lash on all of them. Next up is Volcanic Blood, possibly my favorite, honestly. Roll a dice each time a wound is allocated to this model that was inflicted by a melee weapon. On a 4-up, the attacking unit suffers 1 mortal wound. So if you have a way to deliver a Magmadroth into a crowd of enemies, half the time, because it's a 4-up, that they hurt him, they take a wound back. And that is pretty stinking awesome. Then there's Stare Down, which is the Runefather specific rule. In your hero phase, pick an enemy unit within 3 inches of this model. Subtract D3 from that unit's bravery characteristic until the start of your next hero phase. The idea here is that the Runefather is essentially like just kind of doing this number, right, at whatever enemy unit and distracting them and freaking them out, kind of getting inside their head. The reason, now, you'll hear a lot online that bravery is not really a relevant stat anymore because there's so many ways to ignore battle shock and things like that. However, keep in mind, there are some armies like Daughters of Cain right now before their new battle tome comes out that use their opponent's bravery. If their bravery is higher than their opponent's, they get extra attacks or damage and that kind of stuff. They become more efficient. And so having a way to bring the bravery stat down for some rules, special rules, spells, things like that, actually does matter quite a bit. So don't pass on that one. It's not, game changing, of course, but just kind of, it's a tool in your pocket. And the last of his abilities is Weapon Breaker. This is specific to the Grand Axe that he has. At the end of the combat phase, again, very specific timing, pick an enemy hero within 3 inches of this model and roll a dice. On a 6, pick one of the melee weapons that it's armed with. Subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made with that weapon for the rest of the battle. And you can't pick the same weapon to be affected more than once. So if you get stuck in with a big hero who has a killer weapon, you just go ahead and the idea is on a 6, you subtract 1 from hit rolls from it. So you make it a little bit worse. The idea is he's kind of taking his key axe and breaking the weapon a little bit. Keep in mind, though, that subtracting 1 from hit rolls does not affect a special ability that triggers on an unmodified 6. So if they roll that, it'll still happen because it's, again, unmodified. This is a modifier. And lastly, and one of the reasons I really do like him, is he comes with a great command ability, Steadfast Advance. So in your hero phase, you can use this command ability at the start of your hero phase. If you do so, pick a friendly model with this command ability. Until the start of your next hero phase, do not take battle shock tests for friendly Fyreslayer units while they are wholly within 18 inches of that model. 18 inches is colossal on the base size of a Magmadroth. It is most of your army. Simply put, because a lot of the Fyreslayer units are these big bricks and formations of Fyreslayers moving up the board, and they want to stay relatively close to one another because of the way that they share buffs and things like that. But the truth is, it's most of the army, and we're going to see that's really quite important, honestly. And with that, we are finally done with the Runefather on Magmadroth. But like I said, you can build 2 other heroes in that same kit. There's no conversions or, I know that it's meant to build 1 hero on a Magmadroth, 2 heroes on foot. That's the whole point of the kit. So The next option is our Auric Rune Son. All right, and he is sort of, him and his brothers are competing to get the attention of the Rune Father so that they can kind of basically be called the next heir. And that's going to come up in his rules in a bit. That's why I brought up the lore part. So he has a 4-inch move. Why? Dwarf reasons. That's all I got for you. That is the movement stat for pretty much everyone who's not riding a Magmadroth in this army. He has 5 wounds and a 4-up save and a 7 bravery. Missile weapons. Now he does have a few options here, okay? The Auric Rune Son is a single model armed with the Firesteel Throwing Axes. Again, everybody has the same axe profile. In addition, it's armed with one of the following weapon options. A Ancestral War Axe. So think of like a big honking like double axe weapon. He just kind of goes choppy choppy. Or a Wyrmslayer Javelin. And the Javelin's interesting because it is both a melee and ranged attack. So keep that in mind. You're choosing to go with the Ancestral War Axes in melee. And then you get to throw a Fire Axe as well. Or you have 2 missile weapons, the Throwing Axe, the Javelin, and then you just have the Javelin in melee. So that's a little bit confusing, but it is what it is. Looking at this here, for that Javelin, I'm just going to cover both the Javelin profiles, and then we'll get into the War Axe. So when you're throwing it, 12-inch range, 1 attack, 4s to hit, 3s to wound, -1 rend, and D3 damage. And then if you're using it in melee, 3-inch range, which is great, again, 1 attack, 3s to hit, 3s to wound, -1 rend, and 1 damage. Okay, so, you know, it's a good shot when it lands. It's only 1 attack, so it's not going to happen all the time, but one thing I do want to throw here is that there is a special rule attached to the Javelin, which is add 2 to the damage characteristic, so it goes up to 3 damage, for attacks made with this Wyrmslayer Javelin that target a monster. So he specifically is out there to slay big game and impress his papa. So, in addition to whatever option you choose for there, he gets the Throwing Axe. And then if you go with the melee variant, Ancestral War Axe has 1-inch range, 3 attacks, 3s to hit, 4s to wound, no rend, D3 damage. Personally, I don't see him as being super killy in either capacity, and so I tend to go the way of the Wyrmslayer Javelin. That's just my thought. Also, I just think he looks baller with it. It's a big old stick he's chucking around at people. It's like twice the height of him. As far as abilities go, Vying for Glory. Here's the lore part that I brought up earlier. You can reroll hit rolls for attacks made by this model if there are any other friendly Auric Rune Sons. And it's keyworded, so even if one's on a Magmadroth, within 6 inches of this model. What that means is, if you were to buy multiples of these kits, right? Let's say you bought 2 of them. I would probably do the Rune Father on Magmadroth for 1, and maybe the Rune Smiter, who we'll get to next, on the other, and that would give you 2 Auric Rune Sons on foot. You run them next to each other, and they become much more scary when they're together, because all of a sudden, because it's just, you can reroll hit rolls. Broad, that's everything from the Wyrmslayer Javelin, whether it's being thrown or used in melee. It's your Firesteel Throwing Axe that hits on a 5. It's your Ancestral War Axe. It's just good for both of them. But he is a leader in your army, and so he does have his own command ability, Dauntless Assault. You can use this command ability at the start of the combat phase, again, very specific. If you do so, pick a friendly model with this command ability. Add 1 to wound rolls for attacks made by friendly Fyreslayer units wholly within 12 inches of that model until the end of the phase. Now understand, Fyreslayers is the keyword. He has it. He will add 1 to wound rolls for himself as well. So if you have 2 of these guys walking up as a pair, you know, all giving each other reroll hit rolls, they can then give +1 to any unit nearby. Now, it doesn't stack, is my understanding, right? If you do so, pick a friendly model with this command ability, add 1 to wound rolls made by attacks by friendly Fyreslayers wholly within 12 inches of that model until the end of the phase. Let me think about that one here. My understanding is it wouldn't stack, but I could be wrong about that. But essentially, it's just a minor buff. You know, he wants to be up there, and the reason I say Javelin, honestly, is because he's not super killy on his own, so having him move in behind a large block of infantry where he can project that 12-inch bubble with his command ability, give the rest of the units who do the real work +1 to wound is huge. And then he can stay in the back where it's safe, so he can stay alive to keep giving that buff, and he's just chugging javelins left and right. That's my thought. And that is the Auric Rune Son. So now we're going to move into the last hero, my goodness, that we have, and it's actually one of the most important heroes in this faction. It's the guy you see more than anybody else because he is baller. It is the Auric Rune Smiter. Okay, so he has a 4-inch move, 5 wounds, 5 up saves. He's a little bit more of a weak guy. He's more of a priest type than a warrior, and 7 bravery. He comes equipped with a Firesteel Throwing Axe as well. Again, same profile, 5 to hit, 5 to wound. And he has to make a decision when it comes to his loadout as well. See, it can be armed with a, it's a Latch Axe and a Firesteel Throwing Axes. In addition, it's armed with one of the following weapon options. Runic Iron, which is a melee weapon profile right here, or the Forge Key, which we will talk about later when we get to his abilities. So you're essentially choosing, you can have this special ability, or you can have an entire another weapon profile that you can attack with. It depends on how close to combat you want him to be. So let's take a look here. He comes with the melee weapon. He'll always have the Latch Axe, which is a 1-inch range, 1 attack, 4s to hit, 3s to wound, no rend, 2 damage. It sounds good, but honestly, 1 attack that has a 50-50 shot of going through at all, no rend, it's not going to land as much as you might hope it will. So the 2 damage kind of makes you like raise your eyebrow. It's like, put that eyebrow back down. It's pretty tame. As far as the Runic Iron, if you choose to go with this weapon, it is 1-inch range, 2 attacks, 3s to hit, 4s to wound, no rend, 1 damage. Again, just not very exciting. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about the other option when it comes to his special rules and stuff. Now, moving on to the abilities is kind of where this guy becomes important and why you see so many of him. Magmik Tunneling. Instead of setting up this model on the battlefield, you can place this model to one side and say that it's being set up underground as a reserve unit. If you do so, when you would set up another Fyreslayers unit, instead of setting up that unit on the battlefield, you can say that it's joining this model underground as a reserve unit. Let's see, 1 unit can join this model in this way. At the end of your movement phase, which is just broad, you can do it at the end of any of your movement phases, you can set up this model anywhere on the battlefield more than 9 inches from an enemy units, and then set up any unit that joined it wholly within 12 of this model and outside 9 of the enemy. Any reserve units underground that are not set up on the battlefield by the 4th battle round are destroyed. So, man, there's a lot of text there. What you're basically saying, and it's very important that you read this correctly, okay? When you go to deploy him, you put him off to the side, say, he's underground. Then, the next time you go to deploy another unit, it'll join him. Now, the reason that matters very specifically is because of the way Age of Sigmar works with whoever finishes deploying goes first. So, both of those units, the Rune Smiter and whoever's joining him, count as separate deployments. So, that's just important to remember. For rules clarity's sake, you put the Rune Smiter, your opponent deploys something. Okay, it's my turn. I deploy the Volkite Berserkers with the Rune Smiter. That is, so when you go back and forth, it really does matter because there are some where you take the hero and the unit as one deployment. So it's just important to kind of clarify that for you. But this is how you can kind of get around that 4-inch move. You can, at the end of your first battle round, have him and a big wall of dudes pop up in the dead center of the board to kind of hold off your opponent until the rest of your army with their stunty little legs can run up behind and hop on objectives. You can have them pop up behind the enemy's line and kind of capture back objectives. You could just kind of keep him underground because your opponent has to worry about where they're coming and keep him paranoid. So again, this is an incredible ability, especially for such a slow, or traditionally slow faction. But he's not done, because he has more abilities that are amazing. And we're going to get to those right now. That is the Runic Empowerment. Okay, at the start of your hero phase, so he can't do this on the turn you want him to come up because he's underground during the hero phase. However, he can pop up in the movement phase, and then the next hero phase, he can do this for you. At the start of your hero phase, this model can chant this prayer. If they do so, make a prayer roll by rolling a dice. On a 1 to 2, nothing happens. On a 3-up, the prayer is answered. If the prayer is answered, pick a friendly Fyreslayers unit wholly within 12 inches of this model, or within 18 inches of this model if he's armed with a Forge Key. Hint, Forge Key is a really good option. You can re-roll wound rolls for attacks made by that unit until the start of your next hero phase. So, we have a way with the Rune Sun to give everyone +1 to their wound rolls if they're near him when he does his command ability. And then this is a passive prayer one, and it gives you rerolls, and those do stack. So if you were normally going to wound on a 4, now it's a 3 because the Rune Sun, and a 3-up rerolling thanks to the Runic Empowerment. Now the reason I say the Forge Key is a better choice, simply because this weapon profile does nothing for you. You really don't want this guy in combat. He's there as a delivery mechanism, right? He's a transport vehicle for the Magmik Tunneling, and then the Runic Empowerment to try his best to empower a unit that either comes with him or that he's following up behind on the battlefield. So that's really my suggestion. Honestly, the model doesn't come with like different options for what he's holding, really. So just kind of build him however you want, and just kind of, you can try either one of these out. Just tell your opponent before the game which one you're taking. And the last War Scroll, and yet only the second kit in this entire box, is the Valkite Berserkers. These are your base battle line unit. They are a fantastic model, first of all, as a unit, period, but then also as physical sculpts and models. I love these guys. There are, at the time of recording, a lot of lists that focus on the more elite version, which are Hearthguard Berserkers. But honestly, a big brick of these guys I still think is killer. So it is for holding objectives and that kind of stuff, and board control. So they have a movement of 4, again, dwarf reasons. They have 2 wounds each, and I can't tell you enough how much I love the fact that they gave, since my last review of this box, Fyreslayers 2 wounds each. It just gives them so much more staying power. They have a 5-up save, because they are, in fact, quite naked, and 7 bravery. Okay, so, and then the bravery, it's a little deceptive because Fyreslayers are sort of a horde army, like large bricks of dudes, and so you will get full-size unit bonuses. Every 10 models in a unit, you get +1 to bravery, and so it's a little deceptive. It'd probably be somewhere closer to an 8 or a 9, effectively, on tabletop. Every one of these guys, all 10 of them, come with Firesteel Throwing Axes. Again, they're not great attack profiles, but something's going to go through if you just huck enough dice at something, which is kind of an orc method of accuracy, quote-unquote. And they have a number of weapon options available to them. We're going to go through that right now. In addition to their Firesteel Throwing Axe, the unit is armed with one of the following weapon options: Firesteel Hand Axes and Bladed Slingshields, Firesteel War Picks and Bladed Slingshields, or a pair of hand axes. Okay, so you have an axe and a shield, a pick and a shield, or double axes. So what do all those things do? Well, we'll get into it. One of the units is a Call to Carl. He basically is just the unit leader. He gets a +1 attack. Nothing super fancy. They can also take an instrument, the Horn of Grimnir. One in every 5 models can have a Horn of Grimnir. Add 1 to charge rolls for that unit that includes it. That's super important. Again, that 4 movement stat is debilitating in some instances. So anytime you can get +1s to your move or charge or run, very important. As far as their abilities, this is kind of in the abilities section where the weapon choices start to matter. So let's go through the hand axe and the pick, and then we'll talk about which options I think are pretty good. So for the hand axe, okay, and this is going to be 1 hand axe and your shield. 2 attacks at a 1-inch range. Okay, so they got to get up in there. 3s to hit, 3s to wound, no rend, and 1 damage. Okay, that's all right. The war pick, 2 attacks, 3s to hit, 4s to wound, so a little bit of a debuff there. -1 rend, which is the important part, and damage 1. Now, just based on that, If you're going with, one of these weapons and the bladed Slingshield, which we'll get to later, my preference is for the war pick. And the reason I say that is rend is so important, and we just reviewed that even in this box alone, you have 2 ways of making this 4-up to wound pretty easy to score, right? The Rune Sun can give him +1, and the Rune Smiter, if the prayer goes off, of course, full rerolls. And so I do think that the advantage of having rend is quite fantastic. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, either of those weapon options can come with the bladed Slingshield. So let's talk about that. After a unit armed with the bladed Slingshield makes a charge move, again, +1 to charge if you have a horn, just throwing it out there, pick one enemy unit and roll a dice for each model from the charging unit within 8 inches of that enemy. I'm going to pause right there. So if you have a big block of 30 of these guys, they charge in, and you're going to pause, and you're going to measure out how many of that big block of 30 made it to within 8 inches of the enemy unit. And you're going to roll a die for each single one of them. For each 6, the enemy suffers 1 mortal wound. Okay? The idea is you have literally a bladed shield, and you are hucking at them, right? Trying to basically stab them to death as you're running at them with a hand axe or a war pick. So that is so cool. And again, that's just when you charge. It doesn't happen again in the charge phase like the next turn. If you are stuck in combat, it doesn't happen. It's only on the charge. In addition, add 1 to save rolls for attacks made with melee weapons that target a unit that is armed with bladed sling shields if the target unit did not make a charge move in the same turn. So what that means is, the turn that you charge in, you're throwing weapons, and everyone who gets in can roll a 6. If they're within 8 inches of the enemy, you have a chance to do some mortal wounds, which is fantastic, especially on big infantry blocks. And then the next turn, because you're not getting that bonus, now you get add 1 to your save rolls, which takes them from that 5-up to a 4-up. So they want to be charging, and then they want to get locked into combat. And so that's fantastic for them. The only caveat to add here is that the enemy unit that is attacking them, they only get that bonus to their save if that enemy unit did not charge, which of course, if you're fighting 1-to-1, is super easy to keep track of. If, however, you have a situation where, you charge a unit with your Berserkers here, and then a second enemy unit comes and hits you from the side, you won't get a save against that because they made a charge turn. You will get a save against the unit that you charged last turn. It's a little bit crazy to keep track of, but it honestly, there's not a ton of, multi-charges and that kind of stuff, and so it's awesome. So it really is quite a good rule. And so that's if you're taking one of the melee weapons and the sling shields. As for the double hand axe option, that one is quite intriguing to me. So that one is, you can re-roll hit rolls for attacks made by, basically if they have a pair of Firesteel hand axes. Now let's think about that for a second, okay? You could take 1 hand axe, 1 war pick, and get all the sling shield stuff that we just talked about. Possible mortal wounds on the charge, and then once you get stuck into combat, you get +1 to your save. Or you can take this hand axe profile and get straight up reroll hit rolls. Now, that's important because we just talked about that there are ways to get modifiers to your wound. And so if you can modify both hit and wound on an already pretty good profile, 3-up is a great baseline for any kind of modifier. What you're doing is you're gambling that more attacks are going to go through. Again, but there's no rend on those. My thought is, to be perfectly honest, if you're going to go with large bricks of units, I really do suggest the Firesteel Warpick and the Bladed Slingshield, and then just kind of put some effort into buffing up their 2 wound, because that rend is going to save you. And not only is it rend, but then obviously you're making yourself a little bit more tanky, both with how many dudes you have in the unit, and the +1 to your save that you get from the Bladed Slingshield once you're stuck in. However, if you want to run these guys as a bunch of smaller units that are moving independently, maybe as like a shield wall or chaff or something like that, I do think that there's a good case for double hand axes if you just don't want to put a ton of support into them from heroes and stuff like that. I think there can be a good case for that. So again, there's not a set answer. It's not quite as clear as like the runic iron or whatever for the Auric rune smiter. It's just a matter of what you want the unit to do. But those are my suggestions. I think probably the only option that I feel like doesn't have a lot of weight is the Slingshield and the Firesteel hand axe, because you're not getting the rend and nor are you getting the reroll hit rolls. You're kind of like in the middle of both, but not getting the benefits of either. So just kind of think about that. What I would say, honestly, because so many of the sculpts and the weapons look so cool on these guys, if you're going to build them, you can build a mix in a unit, but you have to be very clear with your opponent what the unit is armed with. So I'm just going to throw that out there. This army as a whole can look very samey, and so I understand the urge to have weapon variety just to make them look different, but you just have to be very clear to your opponent what each unit is armed with. So what we're going to do now is going to pause and take a quick break here for my voice. We're going to come back and talk about the box as a whole and how it does at getting people to start playing Fyreslayers. So with the War Scrolls looked at, basically what I want to talk about is from a bird's eye view about the box itself, kind of its peculiarities, if you will, and then talk about how it is as a value in terms of getting you started with the army and introducing you to the game and that kind of stuff. What I will say is that if you are new to the game, this is a fantastic box for a few reasons. One, you get the iconic hero, the Rune Father. You get some support heroes that support in different ways. See, when I look at Start Collecting boxes, what I'm really trying to look at is how does this prime new players to enjoy the game? And here, you actually have a set that does quite a bit in terms of it gives you command abilities. They don't have spells, so I'm not looking for a mage, but you do have a priest because they do have prayers. You have shooting attacks. Everybody can huck an axe, and then you have ways of learning synergies and things like that with the Rune Smiter and command abilities and things like that. So as far as mechanically teaching new players how to play Age of Sigmar, it's a slam dunk. It just is. I'm not the biggest fan of kits like the Magmadroth kit where it has so many heroes wrapped up in it. Like that's kind of what the Daughters of Cain problem is too with their War Shrine. But the truth is, like, if you're just starting, this is a great place to start. You can buy 3 of these boxes, max out a unit of Berserkers, and then have all the hero options you'll ever need. And then from there, it's just a matter of buying whatever specialists or other support heroes you want to make the most of those. And so I think that that's a fantastic proposition for you. I'm not necessarily recommending that. I would say definitely get 1. Maybe 2, and 3 if you're just a collector and you want to have every option available to you. Beyond that, I really recommend you take a look at Hearthguard Berserkers, the more elite version. They come in 5-man units rather than 10, and they are quite nasty, and so they can be anyway. As far as the value of the box, I would absolutely, basically when I talk about value, I break it down into 2 questions, right? Does what's in this box represent the entire faction, visually and aesthetically? Like, there's no bait and switch here. If you like naked angry fire dwarves, this is a great box as part of a whole faction that's nothing but naked angry fire dwarves. Like, it is what's on the tin. So that's awesome. And that actually is great because not all Start Collecting boxes are like that. And then the second one is, are you actually going to use these models once you have a full army? And the answer to that is, I think, definitely yes. Whether you're using the smaller or the Berserkers that you get in this box as chaff or just a big brick to set on an objective, they do have a lot of uses to them. If you are definitely going to run a Magmadroth or 2 in a list, simply because they have board presence, they can move quickly to objectives, they can clear off objectives with all those crazy awesome attacks. They can do quite a bit. And so I think that there is a lot of value in this box, and because that kit with the Magmadroth is the only way to get the Rune Smiter, and most lists that I have seen, across multiple editions now, have at least 2 Rune Smiters, because that ability to tunnel up and take a unit with them is vital. And the prayers are also fantastic. If you haven't checked those out, they added some new prayers with this battle tome, and they're really sweet. So overall, I say it's a fantastic start. It doesn't have quite the same rebuyability as some other boxes. I definitely think 2 is a great place to start. Absolutely. And then start looking at other options. Then at that point, after you get 2, then you can start kind of planning out what kind of Fyreslayer army do I want and that kind of thing. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Again, at the end of all these videos, I always ask, if you are a Fyreslayer player, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Help somebody else out. I always pin the most helpful comment to try and point new players in the right direction. So if you'd like to contribute to the channel and build an awesome community, go ahead and do that for me. I would really appreciate it. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.